Hello everyone, this is Robert, and these are my favorites and most used wire cutting and stripping tools. I was doing a project recently where I was doing a lot of wiring and stripping and cutting, and I kind of realized that I use multiple strippers and multiple wire cutters, just kind of all for different reasons, depending on the wire gauge and sizes and things like that. So I figured, a lot like my center punch video, I'd go over kind of my preference and why I use certain ones over others. So that's what this video is going to be about. It's one of those kind of, not really tool review videos, but tool preference videos. All of these things are listed down in the description, and of course you can use the chapters to skip around and find the things that are interesting to you. But let's get started. So let's start out with the wire strippers, and then we'll kind of get to the cutters later. Now, one thing to note about this video is for pretty much everything here, we're kind of stopping at around 12 or 10 gauge. Beyond that gauge size, it's a bit different, and you kind of want different stripping options. This is kind of for most basic hobby level hookup stuff, which is going to be 12 gauge and below. So keep in mind that caveat. I'm going to start out with these because I think these are probably my most used and most versatile strippers. So let's take a look at these little guys first. You may or may not be familiar with these, but yeah, we'll take a look at these and see how they perform with kind of different various cables. So if you're not familiar with these at all, they're kind of these interesting automatic wire strippers, and basically they have these nice little dies at one side which correspond to different sizes. One of the downsides to these is they only strip one wire at once. So if you have, let's see, something like this that has two wires on the inside of it, it doesn't really work as well with that. You're going to have to do the outer sheath, which obviously you have to do that anyway, and then that sheath kind of gets in the way a little bit. And if you have something like a ribbon cable or something like lamp cable, it doesn't really work all that well. So these it doesn't work well with. Anything that has multiple conductors side by side, not really so good for. Also with Romex, you got to kind of get the sheath off of it first, expose that, and then you can strip the wire. So yeah, maybe not the most ideal for that either. And also for these little tiny wires, there are openings for them. You've got a, I think that's, what is it, 18 to 20, and then you have like a 22 over there, but it is very difficult to kind of get that lined up just right, and it doesn't always get in the middle of it. So it definitely does work, but not my favorite for that. But for your basic general hookup wires, we got all sorts of different things. Like I think this is probably like a 16 gauge. Line that up. That was the wrong hole. There we go. So it works really nicely for that, and it's relatively quick, and you kind of get a little bit of a feel for it because these remain closed kind of until you snap it away. So yeah, works really well for most cables this size. The other thing to take into consideration is the length that you can strip out. Some of these, like this guy, you can really only strip insofar as the throat will allow it, but because these strip from the side, you can have pretty much any length in there, which is kind of nice. So these are really nice. These are my favorite. These are the ones that I always kind of go to first. They make that nice little snappy sound. They work anywhere from a 12 gauge down to the 22, but I kind of tend to keep it in that 14 to 12 gauge range is what I generally use these for, but they're not going to be good for any cable that has multiple conductors like a ribbon, things like that. Next up, we've got these little automatic cutters. So they kind of clamp down, and then when you pull back, they just kind of pull back the sheath and let go. Have a little bit of a love-hate relationship with these because what they do well, they do fantastic. And these are probably my second most used wire strippers, but for some things they just kind of end up mangling the cable. So what do they do well? Well, ribbon cables and, where's this one? Multiple conductors. So if you have multiple conductors in a single cable, this has two side by side, I'll show you that. They just work wonderfully. So let me show you how they work. So with a ribbon cable, I still tend to like to hold on to the end of it because it doesn't always grab the right way, and maybe these are just really old or really cheap, but you can just put it in there, and then there you go. Every single one of those is perfectly stripped. And for a cable like this, it's a real pain to strip any other way, but everything is really nicely done. There's no, stray connectors left behind, so they work really well for that. And if we look at this cable, these are really common too. Pop it in there, and then we can do it again, and there you go. Nice and simple. So that's what these really excel at. However, if you're going to use them for a standard like Romex, I find that with solid core wiring, they just kind of dig in and don't really always get the sheath off, but just kind of scrape against the actual conductor. So let's see. Yeah. So they definitely got the conductor off, but you can see a gouge right there. I don't know how much you can see that on camera, but there's definitely a burr where it just kind of scraped along the outside, and that's really sharp, like you could cut yourself on that. So solid core, these do not work well on. They work reasonably well for stranded cables. So like this 12 gauge really finely stranded silicone jacket, they do okay, but I found a lot of times they leave a lot of stray wires on the inside. But in a pinch, they work okay. So in summary, any kind of ribbon cable, multiple conductor cable, I mean, come on, this works so well. That's really what these are good at. Next up, we've got these. These work on a very similar principle. They kind of grab down, pull apart, and let go. The difference between these and these is this one has a throat. So you basically have a limited amount that you can fit the wire into. It can really only go in that far. Whereas since these strip from the side, you can obviously strip as far out as you want. I don't use these all that often because I feel like these just do a better job. They're not as good at really fine, tiny cables. These are really good at small cables, so these are much better at bigger cables. So we have some lamp cord right here. These cannot, they can just barely do like a 12 gauge lamp cord. However, with these, it's really not that much of an issue. These can do it just fine, as long as I get that out of there. Yeah, so these can do basically the same thing that these can do, but just in a much larger cable diameter. These also have a built-in cutter. I mean, these do too, but it's really kind of anemic and hard to use down in there, and you know, this can't even fit inside. So I don't know. I really don't use these that much, but if you do primarily this kind of a thing, these are really good at the lamp cord. That's kind of what they're better at, and the larger gauge structured cable, like something like this. Let's cut these off. Something like this also works quite well for these. Same kind of thing. But the the downside to both of these is that you have to strip so much of this back. Like for this, it can't really now fit into the jaws all that well. Just going to strip a tiny little bit off, but you kind of have to strip a good amount off first before you can then expose the wire. So that's just something to kind of think about on either of these, as if it is a jacketed structured cable like this, you're going to have to strip off a fair amount to get to the conductors. And last but not least, we have these Knipex strippers. I just recently got these, so I haven't had that much time to use them, but so far my impressions are very good. I'm rotating it slowly so you can see just the nice, shiny, polished surface on these. These are a very premium set of wire strippers. These cost around $60, so it's definitely a bit spendy, but the quality is definitely there. They are spring-loaded. You've got this lock. You have the cutters from anywhere from 20 gauge down to 10 gauge. You have a good set of pliers here at the end, and then we also have an 832 and a 632 screw cutter. Yes, I will go into that in a second. And then we also have a wire cutter down here. And unlike all the others, these are actually legitimately good in terms of wire cutting. They actually have a really decent wire cutter, and then the stripping is pretty much exactly what you would expect from a wire stripper. And I don't know why I'm screwing this up so much on camera. But there you go. So very traditional wire stripper, and these are exceptionally sharp. I've never, ever felt a wire stripper that has such sharp teeth on it. So yeah, this will be able to do just about anything from a 10 gauge all the way down to a 20 gauge. And if you kind of prefer that traditional wire stripping experience of, you know, actually like cutting it and pulling it out, and you don't like the automatics, these are definitely the way to go. This is the finest pair of wire strippers I've ever experienced in this size. So yeah, pretty nice. And you've got definitely a good wire cutter on there, and then strip it out. Nice and simple. These are kind of good for your basic household electrician tasks because you obviously have the pliers there at the end. You've got the stripper and then, or cutter and the stripper, and then you also have these bolt cutters. So it's kind of that nice one single tool that you can grab for wiring out an outlet or something like that. So let's talk about these screw cutters. Here is a 632. All we have to do is pop it down in this little hole when it's opened up. Pop it down in. You can see it's protruding. Cuts it off. And then here is a nut. And it threads right on there, no problem. No burrs. Look at that. This would normally cut my finger up. Cuts it really nice and cleanly, and you can even do a number 8. This is useful if you're not really sure why this is useful. This is useful. This is the size that goes into your outlet boxes, so you can cut down these screws if they're too long, things like that. And I find it actually very useful. So number 8. Takes a bit of force, but nothing too crazy or excessive. Pop it out. Once again, no burrs at all, anywhere. And then we can just thread that nut right on there. So yeah, these are pretty cool. If you're an electrician or someone that does a lot of household wiring, these are really fantastic. Really, really nicely made tool. Okay, so now it's time to talk about wire cutters. And once again, these are kind of more for that 12 gauge and under size. Got a couple different options. Obviously the classic Hakko CHT 15s, I think that's what they're called. These are really nice. Obviously you can see they're very worn. I've been using these a lot. I have like 3 or 4 of these. Spring-loaded, very basic electronics cutter. These are good for most things. I think like, let's do some lamp cord with them. I think you can kind of go up to about a lamp cord size. They're nice, they're ergonomic, and yeah, they're relatively inexpensive. However, if you want something a little bit nicer than that, these Super Knips are really cool. They're a little bit larger. You can kind of see maybe the throat size on them. They're just a little bit bigger, so you can fit just a little bit more wire inside of them. And I don't know, I was going to weigh them, but they feel like a little bit lighter and just a little bit more comfortable in your hand, and the spring is just a little bit more bouncy. They just kind of feel like a more premium, nicer version of these, and they cut a lot nicer as well. So we can easily cut, something like a lamp cord, no problem. Where's my Romex? Easily cut. Romex, just bounce it off of everything. And then obviously, where's my 12 gauge? Cutting like a 12 gauge cable like this, no problem. These are also fantastic for zip ties. Really, really nice all-around cutter. However, my new favorite is these things, Electrician shears. They're these weird combination of wire cutters, scissors, shears, and these are really fun to use. I think my only downside is they're maybe not the most comfortable thing in the world, but you can kind of cut a little bit of everything with these. So if we go over to this 12 gauge cable, just using the scissors portion, no problem. Then we can go more into the throat, no problem. I've got some big 10 gauge cable right here. No problem whatsoever cutting that 10 gauge. Where's my Romex? We're just having fun cutting everything. The Romex you can not really cut with the snips, but the throat, no problem with that. Then, paper. Can use them as standard scissors. I've got some 1/8" ABS plate. Look at that. And then even things, you know, like cardboard and whatnot. So these are just really, really handy to have. I think the combination of these is great. Obviously, I'm not going into like, you know, just a basic set of diagonal cutters or anything like that, because those are great too. But I use these all the time. These always sit on my workbench for just pretty much all of my cutting needs. And I think the two of these, there we go, the two of these combined is a really fantastic combo. These are what I get for zip ties or any kind of my basic little wire cutting. And then these are just great for everything else. Fantastic tools, both of these. And also gotta, you know, have the mention for the Hakos. I've always really enjoyed the Hakos as well, and I have a bunch of these. So yeah, any of these three, fantastic for all your wire and whatever cutting needs. So that's my wrap up for cutting and stripping all of your various wires and cables. There really isn't like a best one, and that's kind of not the point of this video. I think if you were just going to get one set of wire, well, that's even a silly question because it depends on what you're cutting. You know, what are you cutting? I think if you're doing small cables and ribbon cables, as much as I really don't like these, I think these are the best. These can do all your tiny, tiny little cables like little jumper wires. I'm doing this reverse-handed, but all your little cables, ribbon cables, anything relatively small, these are really hard to beat for just that time and, you know, efficiency. These are really, really efficient and quick. For your general stuff, I kind of like these, but obviously you can't do the multi-conductors as easily. These I kind of use, but this is more of like your lamp cord, speaker cable, things like that size. And then if you're doing primarily electrician stuff, these are just absolutely fantastic. If you're going to be, you know, rewiring your house or doing a bunch of outlets in your garage, definitely pick up something like this. So they all kind of have their purpose, but these, I would say these two together constitute maybe 90% of my uses. That's the majority of what I use, these two right there. For cutters, you owe yourself a pair of these. These are fantastic. I love these as a general purpose, just kind of snippers. These are fantastic. And these are kind of a nice little stocking stuffer gift. You might not use it for every single application. And I actually had these for a bit before I really started using them. And now I kind of always find an excuse to use them. These are really good for that. And then obviously these are the ones that I just kind of have on every workbench. I have one by my 3D printer. I have, you know, one in all the drawers underneath. These are just kind of nice because they're inexpensive and they work really, really well. So yeah, some of my favorite tools for wire cutting and stripping. Hopefully you guys got something out of it. Check out the links down below, and yeah, thanks for watching. See you in the next video.